Would you like to know the 4-part map to being a human and how to have sustainable mental health? Not just mental health, but like long-term, resilient, anti-fragile, sustainable mental health. Well, then watch this video to find out. Hello, my name is Jesse. Welcome to my channel, Open Source Owners, where we talk about what if humans had an owner's manual? Wouldn't that be a nice way to navigate the world if we kind of knew how to operate the machinery a little bit? So that's what this channel is all about, and that's what today's video is all about. And I'm going to start with a map that I just built. And I am not a graphic designer, as you probably can tell. I just made this on Canva because I wanted to have a way to represent it. There are several maps that I sort of use in my thinking that really help me understand how the human operates and ultimately how I can help other people. But maybe even more crucially, I can learn to help myself and sort of grow into my own best version of myself, which is what being an owner is all about. Being the best, most wise, most compassionate, most elevated version of yourself. And this is the map that I find to be very useful. Does it cover everything? Of course not. No map does, right? Being a human is much more rich than what a map can convey. But I do believe these 4 areas are irreducible. You cannot just focus on, like if you're struggling with mental health or if you want sustainable health in general. Remember, I'm using the term sustainable mental health or sustainable physical health as well. As separate from just like using coping skills to get better, but then knowing that you'll probably have another dip or you'll need some like more, inpatient treatment or deeper treatment, or you end up going into hospitals or things like that. We really want to avoid that. We want to have sustainable, long-term, both mental but also physical health. And in order to achieve that, we really have to be able to recognize that there are these 4 sort of distinct but interacting areas that really make up a whole healthy functioning human. And they are the biological aspect of the human, which we'll talk about in a second, the psychological aspects of being a human, the social aspects of being a human, and then the spiritual aspects of being a human. What's cool about Canva is they have a bunch of cool fonts. And so that's what I used. Cool. All right. So when I talk about the biological domain of being a human, we're talking about things like vitamin and mineral levels, right? SNPs, which is a genetic thing, single nucleotide polymorphisms, like whether your body can synthesize enough vitamin D or vitamin B12 or not. And by the way, both those things I just mentioned, vitamin D and vitamin B12, low levels are associated with depression or depression-like symptoms. And so again, when we're talking about mental health, sustainable mental health, unfortunately, your psychiatrist, your psychologist, your social worker will not be able to locate, no matter how many years of talk therapy you have, they will never, ever uncover that fundamentally you have a low vitamin D level. It's just impossible for the domain, the psychological domain, to really connect to the biological domain through traditional means. Now, there are people who do this, who can do both, right? So I'm not saying nobody out there can do this, but just keep in mind there are biological drivers of difficulties in mental health or difficulties in, your social milieu or difficulties with physical health that are just biological. They're just how your biological system works. Another example, very common, is food allergies. So, for instance, I'm a farmer. I grow vegetables, and I used to say to folks that you should just eat as many vegetables as possible. But then you'll learn about things like oxalic acid, right? Things like spinach for some people, or kales for some people, or peppers for some people may be indigestible and cause chronic inflammation, which can lead to brain fog, anxiety, and depression. So food allergies is just a purely biological aspect of having a healthy, sustainable mental health, but again, sustainable human health in general. Chronic stress, and how that affects the biological system. If you're engaging in and drinking bad water, bad air, or bad food quality, how that affects the physiological system. That your toxic pressures, like whether you grew up in a place with, high levels of certain toxins in the air, or if you live near a farm, maybe they're spraying, some type of glyphosate or some type of like herbicide that actually adds a toxic pressure to your biological system that other people don't have because they don't live in that same environment, right? So that domain needs to really be focused in on separately because it really underlines all the next 3 domains. And the next one I'm going to go to is the psychological domain of human health and sustainable health. So what am I talking about here? So things like abuse, trauma, neglect, emotional regulation. Often we never learned emotional regulation skills from our mom or our dad. It wasn't modeled to us. So we learned poor emotional regulation systems, attachment, safety and danger coding. And that refers to polyvagal theory and the vagus nerve in general, and how the whole body is always scanning for social cues of safety or danger. And then when we grew up in a certain environment where maybe the danger signals were more relevant or more present to us, we code that as that's reality. But remember, it's not reality. It's the perspective. It's the context in which we grew up in. It was reality, or at least it was in part reality for how we grew up. But as an adult, it may no longer serve us, and we may need to retrain the psychological apparatus of how we understand what is safe and what is dangerous in other people. Internal projections. So that's the psychological domain. Now, just already you can start to see that the biological and the psychological will influence each other. We know that, for instance, that there's a high degree of connection between the gut and how the gut is performing and how the brain works. So things like brain fog or anxiety or depression, those can actually be triggered from psychological domains like abuse, neglect, etc. But they can also be distinctly triggered by the biological domain, low vitamin B12, low vitamin D, high levels of toxicity, etc. So, but also if you've experienced abuse or trauma or neglect as a child, that psychological damage begins to influence how the biology is working, how your microbiome is working, and how your whole physiological system is playing into your psychological system. So you immediately begin to see these things cross-interacting with each other. And then, to add complexity to the picture, we have a social dimension. Humans are intensely social. We are meant to be embedded in tribal connections between 75 and 150 people. That's called the Dunbar's number, which is written here. The Dunbar's number, if you're wondering, is 75 to 150 people, is how humans are supposed to be nested, and how we're supposed to sort of live our lives, experience our loss, have celebrations, feel protected, feel seen, have intimate relationships with 75 to 150 people that we can remember their stories and their histories and their connections to us. Now, obviously, there are other dimensions to the Dunbar's number or social interaction too. There's 3,000 person numbers, and then there's lower numbers like a familial unit. But by way of talking about the social domain and the social connection that we all have, we really want to think in that 75 to 150 close, intimate connections. That's how we're supposed to be evolutionarily, right? Now, what's the role of social isolation? What does that play on the psyche or the biology? What about social bonding? What about trauma bonding when adults are in relationships where they're both playing out their own traumatic interactions with one another, and they become intimately bonded and sort of reliant upon each other in that way, but it's based around trauma? How does that influence sustainable mental health? Well, it does. It really does. Linking human minds together. This is something that we don't often think about, but it is 100% how human brains work. You yourself and me, myself, separate as just a single human in the world, incapable of having a true perspective of reality. We, in fact, rely upon other people in the same scenario, witnessing the same event, to triangulate meaning, purpose, and the truth out of that situation. And that's how it's referred to sometimes as public wisdom or collective wisdom. When you can get a bunch of people problem solving together beyond the polemics of left and right, or, I'm right, you're wrong, or Republican, Democrat, beyond that into just let's try to understand this phenomena, whatever it was, together. Human minds begin to actually link together and form a superstructure that we might call like a supermind or a super intelligence, something like that. What do we miss when we don't have that regularly? So notice, if you're trying to heal, let's say let's just go with depression. You have like depression, you've struggled with depression for years, and you're talking about, I want to sustainably be reliably out of depression. And yes, I can experience loss or grief, and I'll go into a natural depression where I'm just mourning and grieving, but I know I'll be able to come out of it. It won't be a downward spiral into, losing your job or losing relationships or wanting to engage in self-harm or even suicidal actions, right? If you want that sustainable mental health aspect to your life, which I think we all should, I think we all do want that, then maybe in part, the treatment or the antidote to that depression is going to involve some type of connection socially, some type of repair of the damage that has happened to the social aspect of our being. And then the last one, and again, these four are irreducible. You can't just focus on biology and leave out all the other three. You can't also just focus on social. You can't just focus on the biological, social, and psychological and leave out the spiritual. These are irreducible. You need all four of these minimum to have a healthy functioning human. So what is the spiritual dimension? It could be a connection to a higher power. It's not going to be that for everybody, but really it means self-sovereignty, the ability to grow, the ability to sort of like maturely and in engaging in the wisdom of the human experience, growing into how we want to be, right? So learning from the trials and tribulations of being a human and then developing ourselves into a higher consciousness. That's kind of what we mean by self-sovereignty or spiritual work if you don't connect it to a religion. Natural law, understanding that there are natural spiritual laws that interact with being a human. Dogs don't have to live by natural law because dogs don't have the same consciousness we do. But when we get to a certain level of consciousness, certain laws of the universe begin to apply. And guess what? We have spiritual laws of the universe. Sometimes it's called spiritual law or karmic law or cosmic law or natural law. And that's a place for another video. Peak experiences. People going into highly exalted dance activities or, going into sensory deprivation tanks or engaging in psychedelic experiences or indeed near-death experiences give us a glimpse into something much richer, some entities that seem to be out there that are in a spiritual domain or an aspect of ourself that transcends just like, day-to-day paying the bill sort of stuff. Flow states connect us to that peak experience often, and it can be religious for people or quasi-religious or spiritual. Profound connection to nature, deep reverence, deep interaction, deep engagement with nature is another aspect of our spiritual domain. Okay, so that's a lot, but just keep those four things in mind and recognize that they all have to sort of ebb and flow together. They all are part of the puzzle of being an owner, being a human, right? So just by way of showing you how they all interact, I wanted to just give this one example. So adverse childhood experiences is ACE. That's a questionnaire that you can take. It's online, so you can take an ACE questionnaire. And if you score 4 yeses out of 10 questions or higher, these are some of the numbers that you are then going to be faced with by way of correlation, not causation, right? You will be 2 times as likely to be a smoker if you have 4 yeses on the ACE questionnaire. You'll be 7 times more likely to be an alcoholic, right? It increases your risk of emphysema and chronic bronchitis by nearly 400%, and attempted suicide by 1,200%, right? An ACE questionnaire score of 6 or higher, one is at risk of their lifespan being shortened by 20 years and having multiple suicidal attempts as well. Right? So now think about that. That's just one aspect. We would typically call the ACE questionnaire fitting into the psychological domain, like you see in the bottom corner here. So that's a psychological aspect, that trauma that person experienced. But notice what that actually began to do. It began to shorten lifespan. That goes right up to the biological. So these are highly, highly connected. People who have experienced trauma or neglect often socially tend to isolate and not trust other people. So that affects the social domain as well. And then when people are feeling like they and have been abused without help or without support or without connection to something bigger than themselves, then they often feel there's no meaning or higher power in reality, and they begin to lose a spiritual connection to themselves and to others. And so all 4 of the things cycle together, and the sustainable mental health or sustainable physical health becomes less and less likely as each of these foundational aspects of being ourselves begins to erode. Hopefully this map gives you a different view of yourself and a different view of what it means to sort of be an owner or to sort of be a human really in this world. It really is a dance and a balance between these 4 areas minimum. There's probably other areas and aspects that this leaves out, but at the very least this is a core, not too many aspects, just 4 that we have to focus on, but all 4 of these are actually critical to sustainable, long-term, resilient mental health and physical health. Cool. All right, I hope you found that useful. If you want to know more information, please download your free ebook. It's 60 pages. I wrote it for you. It's called The Owner's Manual Part 2. Click the link below, and that will be yours. It'll come right to your email. And that was the 4-part map. So you remember those 4 parts to being a human and having sustainable mental health. And I wanted to introduce both that map, but also the idea of sustainable mental health and sustainable physical health. That's what we all really want. We don't want just good mental health. We want it to be sustaining through life's trials and tribulations. We want to get more resilient, get more anti-fragile the older we get. The more we've been through, the stronger we get. That's kind of the goal. And, that's kind of an interesting phrase, stronger we get, because often to be stronger means to be more soft, more vulnerable, more compassionate. So I'm not saying to be hardened to life, but rather to grow into life in a heartfelt, spiritual way where we get wiser and deeper and more nuanced as we get older and not less. So that is the goal. Hope you found this useful. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch. If you made it this far, give it a like, give it a subscribe, comment. The more engagement, the better for the YouTube algorithm. That helps grow the channel. That helps me make more videos, etc. But I particularly always love comments. So what did this make you think of? Did this bring up anything to mind? Do you want to add another dimension to this 4-part map? Maybe there's a 5th part that I missed that you're thinking that's more important. How's Jesse not talked about that? Oh my gosh, what's his problem? So if you put that comment in the links below, then I will read that and I will appreciate that. Thank you guys again for watching this far. I hope you have a good day out there. Take care of yourself. Share this if you think somebody might find it useful, and I will see you in the next video. Bye-bye.